Something happened inside Windsor Castle that palace staff still whisper about in private. A woman walked through one of the most protected corridors in the royal residence, completely relaxed, expecting another ordinary morning. Then she looked up and froze. Right there on the wall, beside the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, was Princess Diana. Not a copy, not a temporary display. The official portrait that had reportedly been hidden away in a dark storage room for more than 2 decades. The same portrait many insiders believed would never see daylight again. According to accounts from palace staff, Camilla stood there in complete silence for nearly a full minute. Then came a sound one witness later described as, like tires screeching on wet pavement. That was the moment everything changed. Today we are diving into one of the most explosive royal stories circulating among journalists, society insiders, and palace watchers. A story about power, resentment, loyalty, and a portrait that allegedly became the center of a quiet war inside the monarchy. Because what many people don't know is that this was never just about a painting. It was about Diana's place in history. And according to people close to the palace, Prince William had been preparing this move for years. The portrait itself already carried emotional weight long before the drama inside Windsor began. The artist reportedly painted Diana during one of the brightest periods of her public life. She was radiant then, still young, still hopeful enough to believe things might improve inside her marriage. When the portrait was finally finished, witnesses say Diana walked toward it slowly and stared at it for a long time without speaking. Then her eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic tears, not public tears, the kind someone tries desperately not to let fall. Accounts from people present say Diana eventually reached out, held the artist's hands, and kissed them softly in gratitude. She was deeply moved by what she saw staring back at her, not because it showed a princess, because it showed her. And that portrait was reportedly intended for the Hall of Matriarchs inside Windsor Castle, one of the most symbolic spaces in the royal residences. A wall reserved for women viewed as central to the monarchy's history. Diana was supposed to be there, but she died before it happened. And according to long-circulating palace rumors, once Camilla gained influence inside the royal household, the portrait disappeared. That is where the story becomes darker. Insiders claim the painting was personally removed and carried into storage, not archived publicly, not placed in another ceremonial room, hidden. One former staff member allegedly described the room as cold, dusty, and rarely opened. The portrait stayed there for years, while generations of visitors walked the halls without ever seeing it, and this detail keeps coming up in royal conversations. Camilla allegedly insisted on moving the portrait herself. When a staff member reportedly offered to help carry it, the offer was rejected sharply enough that nobody else dared speak again. Witnesses later claimed she walked out of the storage room smiling after the door shut behind her, not awkwardly smiling. Victorious, smiling. That single image has lingered in royal gossip circles for years. But there's more to this story. Because the tension between Diana and Camilla did not begin with portraits or palace walls. It had been building for decades through humiliations, whispered insults, and private cruelties that rarely made headlines at the time. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Diana's struggles became tabloid material almost daily. Her weight loss, her mental health, her emotional public moments, everything was dissected in newspapers. Meanwhile, according to several royal biographers and society insiders, certain aristocratic circles treated Diana like an outsider from the very beginning. Too emotional, too common, too fragile. People inside those circles reportedly gave Diana cruel nicknames behind closed doors. One of the most repeated was the clothes horse, implying she existed only to model glamorous outfits without substance underneath. Another nickname was Bambi, all elegance, no backbone, and according to accounts that have circulated, For years, these comments were sometimes made openly at social gatherings Diana herself attended. Imagine that for a second. Standing in a room full of powerful people while they quietly laugh at you without directly saying your name. One former staff member later claimed Diana developed an almost frightening ability to absorb humiliation, publicly without reacting. She would smile politely, continue conversations, and move through crowded rooms as though nothing had happened. But privately was different. One particular account has followed royal reporting for years. After overhearing one especially cruel remark at a formal gathering, Diana allegedly returned to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and remained completely still for a very long time. No tears, no shouting, just silence. And according to the staff member present, that silence was harder to witness than crying would have been, because crying lets pain escape. Silence means someone is burying it alive. These stories provide insight into something larger that royal observers have debated for decades. Diana was adored publicly, but privately many insiders believed she was emotionally isolated inside the institution she married into. By the early 1990s, her marriage to Charles was collapsing openly. The famous line about 3 people in the marriage would eventually become part of global history. But long before that interview aired, insiders already understood the triangle consuming the royal family from the inside, and William saw more than many people realized. That matters later. Because, according to palace rumors, the restoration of Diana's portrait was not emotional impulse. It was strategy. Careful strategy. Accounts from royal insiders suggest William spent years quietly studying ceremonial placement rules inside royal residences. Not weeks, years. He reportedly consulted historians, curators, and palace officials to ensure every regulation was followed perfectly. Every placement guideline, every procedural detail. Why? Because if the portrait returned, officially, it needed to become untouchable afterward. No challenge, no reversal, no quiet removal in the middle of the night. And according to those same insiders, there was one person William trusted completely during the operation. Princess Anne. That part shocked many royal watchers most of all, because Anne's connection to this story stretches back far beyond Diana, far beyond Charles, back nearly 50 years. And once people understood Anne's role, the entire story suddenly felt less like palace gossip and more like a reckoning decades in the making. To understand why this portrait allegedly became such an emotional battlefield, you have to go back long before Diana ever entered the royal family. Long before the wedding dress. Long before the fairy tale collapsed on television in front of the world. The roots of this story reportedly begin with Princess Anne. For years, royal historians and journalists have discussed Anne's early relationship with Andrew Parker Bowles. According to multiple accounts, the two were genuinely serious during their younger years. Marriage was reportedly considered, but royal expectations complicated everything. At the time, Andrew's Catholic connections reportedly created concerns within palace circles, and the relationship eventually faded. Soon afterward, he married Camilla in 1973. Anne attended the wedding. That detail matters more than many people realize, because senior royals cannot simply skip major social events without creating public speculation. So Anne reportedly sat there, perfectly composed, and watched another woman marry the man she once imagined building a future with. People close to Anne have often described her as emotionally disciplined to an almost intimidating degree. She rarely displayed vulnerability publicly. She did not collapse dramatically under pressure. She hardened, and according to insiders, that emotional steel shaped how she dealt with Camilla for decades afterward. Many are questioning how much tension truly existed between the two women behind closed doors. Publicly, the royal family maintained formality and restraint. But biographies and insider accounts have repeatedly suggested Anne kept Camilla at a cold distance for years. Then Diana entered the picture, and the monarchy changed forever. Unlike older generations of royals, Diana connected emotionally with ordinary people almost instantly. Crowds responded to her differently. Cameras loved her. Children relaxed around her. Patients in hospitals reached for her hand. She brought warmth into a system often criticized as emotionally distant. But what many people don't know is how overwhelmed she reportedly became behind palace walls. Diana was very young when she married Charles, still trying to understand herself. Suddenly, she was trapped inside one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth. And according to accounts from journalists who covered the royal family at the time, Diana often felt abandoned emotionally. Charles allegedly spent long periods emotionally detached. Palace culture reportedly discouraged vulnerability. Mental health conversations were limited and uncomfortable during that era. Meanwhile, Diana's struggles intensified. Her bulimia became severe. Her confidence collapsed. Her loneliness deepened. Yet every public appearance still required perfection. Smile correctly, wave correctly, stand correctly. Even her height became a problem. Diana stood around 5'10", taller than Charles in heels. According to photographers and royal commentators, she sometimes adjusted her posture before pictures so Charles would not appear shorter beside her. Think about that. A woman shrinking herself physically to protect a man's image in photographs. And still, the tabloids mocked her. Columnists criticized the way she stood, the way she moved, the way she carried herself during emotional strain. One newspaper reportedly compared her posture to a nervous young animal. Those words stayed with people, especially because Diana reportedly knew exactly what was being written about her. And according to long-running palace gossip, certain social circles around Camilla found the press attacks entertaining. Morning tea conversations allegedly included reading cruel headlines aloud while friends laughed together at Diana's expense. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate remains debated. But the consistency of these stories across multiple royal biographies is what keeps them alive decades later. There is one moment especially that insiders still discuss quietly. At a formal event, someone allegedly used one of Diana's insulting nicknames loudly enough for her to hear. The room reportedly went silent immediately. Diana smiled politely and continued moving through the gathering. But later that evening, according to a former staff member, she returned to her room and sat motionless for an extended period. That image haunted people who worked around her, because Diana's public grace often hid private exhaustion. Then came 1997, and everything shattered. The Paris crash changed the monarchy permanently. Public grief exploded across Britain and around the world. Flowers filled the streets. Crowds gathered outside royal residences. People cried openly for someone they felt they truly knew. But inside palace walls, another process reportedly began immediately. According to royal accounts that have circulated, for years, conversations started almost instantly regarding jewelry and royal property connected to Diana. An aide reportedly traveled to Paris while Diana's belongings were still being processed.